Benzion.
How's it going, Jacob? Yaakov?
Good. Has your mouth recovered from the dentist?
Not fully.
Not fully. Okay.
You really put in there, really dig in there and put all the sedative that you could.
Sounds good.
Usually
So you
it
would
goes
feel
away
less
much
pain.
sooner. Hmm.
So you
Yeah,
would feel less pain.
exactly. And
Sounds.
it did feel like he was putting some effort into it. I could definitely feel his yetzirah. Like it was directing it in the right direction, but there was definitely some yetzirah there.
The Talmud says, "Hatov shebarofim lagehinom."
Tov shebarofim again. No, interesting. What is it?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of different ways people explain that,
Mm-hmm.
and it's difficult to translate. But the simple translation would be that the
Gotcha.
best of the doctors still goes to hell, and so there are various explanations. A doctor who thinks that he is um,
Mm.
that it's his skill, therefore, or if a doctor, yeah, I mean, there it's, but it's a common saying in some places. Hatov shebarofim legehinom.
Yeah.
Okay. Uh, do we remember anything from Tanya from last time?
Um. So I know we stopped at Shivim Panim Torah, the 70
Yep.
faces, facets.
So that was a note. Yeah, that was a note.
Mhm.
So he was talking about how a place in the Zohar there appears to be a place where, so this Hasidic concept of tzaddik, right?
Mhm.
It's kind of, um it was and continues to be, at least in some places, controversial. This idea that it's Sadiq is just something completely different, and he's going to get into this. But
Mhm.
um, that there are these tzaddikim who are just, it's that there's a qualitative difference between a tzaddik and everybody else.
Makes
And
sense.
tzaddik yesod olam, right? That a tzaddik, I mean, he's going to get into it, but like, that they're basically these pillars on which the rest of the world stands.
Mhm.
And the rest of us have a very different tafkid in life, a very different um, way of going about life, which actually kind of precludes the type of perfectionism that would make a lot of people depressed, and in fact does make people depressed, because if you think of yourself as, I need to not sin ever,
Mhm.
and that's within my capacity, then then you fail, you're going to be like, oh, why am I not able to reach this level that maybe God wants from me?
Yeah.
And what Hasidic philosophy says is, you know what? Um, you have your tafkid in life. You have your capacity to um, fight the evil that is within you, um, and you should you should have a simcha. You should have be happy in your capacities to fight whatever much you're able to. And that even somebody who really, I mean, even somebody like Rava, right, who was in fact a tzaddik, that there is a value in that person viewing themselves as a Beinoni, as an intermediate person.
Right. Almost. Yeah. I guess the value seems like the value would be for them, maybe to see it. Maybe for us as well, but it is for them. For us, it causes a problem. Sorry if I sound weird, but
No,
for us, it can cause a problem of like, yeah, if he views himself as Benoni, like, what am I?
right.
And this is what um, Tanya goes into,
Yeah.
and I guess even though you see yourself as, even though you want to have this, like you realize that being a tzaddik is in some ways almost impossible, right? Because of that qualitative difference,
Mm.
um, it's still, I feel like it's still necessary. Is it still necessary to view, like, it's still a hierarchy that you want to go? It's still a ladder that you're climbing. So even though you're climbing towards a place that's a little lower, you're still you still want to see the, or want to reach the upper
So
mountains.
yeah, I mean, the way Jordan Peterson puts it, I think is really how we should view it. Is um, don't compare yourself to who someone else is today. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday, right?
Yeah.
So um, ultimately, God creates us and puts us where we are, and the real question is, which way are we facing? Are we
Mm.
growing? Are we becoming better? Are we facing towards God and sanctification? Or
Mm-hmm.
are we, chas v'shalom, like the opposite of that?
Yeah.
Okay. So do you want to give it a try reading, or should I? Or
If you can start, and then we'll let
okay.
this go away a little bit, but I'll go for it as well. I won't give everything for to you.
Okay. V'had amrinan ba'alma, the mechza al mechza mikri beinani, v'rov zachoyot mikri tzaddik, hu shem hamushal la'inyan schar v'onesh. And what is sometimes said, and apparently this is from Maimonides in Hilchot Teshuvah, and Rashi on the Talmud in Rosh Hashanah, right? That so there are these concepts that, okay, at Yom Hadin, right, a person who is more righteous than sinful is considered a tzaddik, and right, and a Beinoni would be mechza al mechza, like somebody who's exactly at half and half. That is with regards to schar v'onesh and din. That is um, regarding actually being judged uh, for punishment and reward. But when we're talking about a tzaddik, somebody who in their nature is tzaddik, umikri tzaddik bedino ma'achar shezocha badin, right? That's talking about somebody who ultimately is justified, right, in at the trial. Ava inyan amitat shem hator. But when we're talking about the actual what we would call them, that person, v'hama'ala shel ma'alat umadregot chalukot tzadikim ubeinanim, and we're talking about the various levels of souls, distinctions between souls. Amru Rabbeinu Zachronam Laracha, tzadikim yetzer tov shoftan, shene'emar v'libi halal bekirbi. That's what it is in, doesn't say where.
Psalms.
Yeah, but that's Rabbeinu Zichronam Lebracha. I was wondering
Oh,
where he meant that
mhm,
Chazal spoke about that. Um,
right.
Tzadikim yetzer tov shoftan shenemar v'libi halal bekirbi. Libi halal bekirbi. That's from Psalms, right? My heart
Mhm,
is empty within me, right? She'ein lo yetzer hara ki harago betanit, because David was able to, in essence, kill his evil inclination.
mhm,
Aval kol mi shelo higia lamadragazu, anybody who has not reached that level, af shezichiotav merubim al avonotav, eino b'ma'alat umadragat tzadik klal. Such a person who, and so this word libi, right? So in Hebrew you can write heart with either lev or levav, right?
mhm,
And one of the ways that the rabbis teach the difference between lev and levav is that lev implies a unified intention, usually for good, hopefully for good, but can also
mhm,
mean that a person has completely given themselves over to their evil inclination. And lavav shows that you have the two aspects, right? You have Yetzer Hatov and Yetzer Hara, and that's why. So in Shema it says, "Va'afta et Hashem Elokecha bechol levavcha," right? And
mhm.
so you have to, even with your Yetzer Hara, you have to love God,
Right. So
however you
this
can.
is this is related to the comment at the beginning. The dentist has a as a yetzirah that he's directing towards the good, which is making my teeth better. Um, Dan also has actually an interesting question that I'm also
Yeah.
curious about.
How does one go about to measure their upper potential in order to know what they're responsible to strive up to? That is, in fact, an incredibly good question. And the I would say, um, I mean, this is what um, John Vervaeke talks about, being in the zone of, where you're just reaching, if it's impossible for you to fail, if you are not challenging yourself, then you're not challenging yourself, and you should be.
Hmm.
But if you're constantly failing, right, you shouldn't be failing on a regular basis, right? So, for example, and maybe this is a little too graphic, but I'm going to go with it anyway. I was talking to a certain person who was dealing with his problems with pornography and masturbation, etc. And like he was telling me that like he would end up shaking, and like it's like, and he would fail himself, and he would feel like, oh, I should have been able to. And my thing to him was, okay, if you're not setting goals for yourself that you can in fact reach, and then you're just setting yourself up to fail, right? If
Yeah.
you set for yourself a goal that you can reach, and once you reach it, first of all, make sure that you acknowledge the fact that you reached the goal, and then set the bar a little bit higher, right? And I often make an analogy to somebody who goes to a gym, right? If you shouldn't be trying to deadlift 500 pounds the first time you go to the gym, right? You'll hurt yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You start with what you know you can do, and then you start trying to be a little bit better and a little bit better and a little bit better. And that's, I mean, I constantly quote this verse in Proverbs. It says, Al tehit tzaddik harbe. Don't be too righteous,
Mm-hmm.
right? Don't be tzaddik harbe. Just be a little. That's tzaddik katzat, right? Just be a little bit better than you were before. And if you always meet all of your goals, then you're not setting your goals high enough. And if you're always failing your goals, then you're setting your goals way too high.
Yeah, and it's probably not also not good to do it in isolation or like by yourself, because what you're describing is feedback loops. You keep doing these feedback loops where you check, am I doing well, am I doing wrong. You probably want other people to help you know if you're doing better or like good or bad, like giving you that feedback, or also like letting you know if, because the things that you do might be helpful for you, it might be also helpful for other people. So if you're thinking about how to be valuable to other people, are they telling you that you're valuable to them? um, so there's a capacity that you can continue filling.
Right. So there's a beautiful thing that the Rebbe explained regarding a Farbrengen, regarding Hasidic, like why is it that you have a Farbrengen, which is a Hasidic gathering where people encourage each other to be better, right? To improve. And he explains why does that spiritually work? Because each person has a Yetzer Tov and a Yetzer Ra.
Mhm.
Each person has an evil inclination, has a basically an angel who is trying to get him to do good, and a demon which is trying to get him to do bad.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference between when I am trying to confront that demon, confront my demons, as opposed to when I have somebody who's helping me confront my demons, is that we know that the nature of good is to help, and the nature of evil is selfish, is for itself, right? So your Yetzer Hatov, right, wants to help you, but also wants to help the other person as well. So you, in essence, team up together, whereas the Yetzer Ra, right, the evil inclination, can't even work together, right? So you end up with 2-on-1, right? You and your chavruta, um, both both my good inclination and your inclination help me with my evil inclination, whereas
Mm-hmm.
your evil inclination doesn't have that capacity to cooperate. um,
Right.
and so yeah, it's incredibly important to encourage. And yeah, you cannot, so which is one of the reasons it's so important, also to be married. And like in Judaism, like this is one of the things that Judaism's constantly harping on, is the capacity of people chavrutot, right? The Talmud says, "O chavruta, o matuta," either chavruta, a learning partner, or death. And similarly, the Shulchan Aruch says, a person who's not married, lo nikra adam, lo nikra adam. is not considered a human being, because that, like, we are not atomistic individuals. We exist in cooperation with other human beings, and we're not able to perform in as atomistic individuals.
Mm-hmm.
Weiter? Weiter is
I can.
Yiddish for further.
Sorry.
Weiter is Yiddish for further.
Further.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Okay. V'lachen, and therefore, Amru Rabbeinu Zechron Lecha b'midrash Ra'ah, which midrash is this? In Yoma 38b. Ra'ah HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'tzadikim shehem mu'atin amad ushtalan b'chol dor vador. So this is the concept of the 36 tzaddikim, that in every generation God has dispersed 36 righteous people who, in essence, these people are not capable of being, like, they're pillars by which the world stands. So God, standing outside of time, was able to see those people who were in fact tzaddikim, and he spread them out through the generations, so that in every generation there would be tzaddikim, uchamosh katuv, letzaddik yesod olam, that the righteous man is the foundation of the world. So through by making sure that there is always a tzaddik in every generation, God, in fact, assures that ultimately the world will get to that place it needs to be. Beor ha'inyan. However, the explanation of the matter, al pi ma shekatav harav Chaim Vital zichrono livracha b'shar hakadosha. So now we are going to talk about Reb Chaim Vital, who was the primary student of the Arizal, and most of what we know from the teachings of the Arizal are from the writings of Reb Chaim Vital. The lechol ish Israel echad tzaddik ve'echad rasha yesh shtei neshamot dichtiv uneshamot ani asiti. So every Jew, whether righteous or wicked, possesses two souls, as it is written, I created souls, right? So the least number is 2. And so we assume that each person has at least these 2. And he explains there that one is the animal soul, and the other is the godly soul. Shehen shtei nafashot. So the word soul is used in different ways in different places. Hasidic philosophy has made it to some extent standardized. So we talk about the 5 levels of soul, the lowest being nefesh, and then the next up being ruach, and then neshama, and then chaya, and then what's called yechida or neshama shel neshama, and those are, for a full person, has all of these various aspects. But if a person, it is actually possible that these potential powers are not active within you if you have allowed your soul to be sullied, and you have For example, karet, right? Excision. If you have allowed your spiritual connection with God to be severed, um, and ultimately to the point that if you completely become severed from all spirituality, you will cease to exist. So this is in a sense kind of annihilationist. But so shehen shte nefashot. So now we're talking at the lowest level, which is the nefesh. Nefesh achat mitzad haklipa vesitra achra. So some things come from the other side or the husks. And so there are three impure husks and one shining husk.
So I have a question. It's
Mhm.
also might be a small tangent, but I'm just curious.
Yeah.
So when you say nefashot and you were explaining the differences, it also reminded me that in Genesis it says "Ubayom hashvi'i vayinfash,"
Yeah, Shabbat ve'nafash.
Shabbat vayinfash. So how does that connect somehow to
So, I mean,
another live stream? Something like
I wish I was better capable to talk about this stuff than I am, because honestly, I'm not. I only know the things that I know, and in certain places, I mean, when you look at the mefarshim, especially those commentaries which explain things through the ways of the Kabbalistic learning of the Torah, they are medayek. They pay attention to these words very closely.
right?
Um,
Just to make sure that we're talking about the in Genesis, it says God vayinfash, like rested. I don't know how what the translation in English,
right.
but that's what we're talking about.
Right. So it says, yeah, Shabbat ve'nafash, that God rested and, well, I guess yeah, we could look up Shabbat ve'nafash, what exactly the um, thing is, but ve'nafash. Uh, so no, that's Exodus 23. That's not. Okay, so Exodus 31:17. Beini uben bnei Israel, othi le'olam, ki sheshet yamim asa Hashem et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, uvayom hashvi'i shavat ve'yinafash. And the way they translate this, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. Yeah, I guess I could actually look at the commentaries. So Rashi says here. Rashi says Ketargumo v'nach v'chol lashon nofesh hu lashon nefesh. So anytime it's using that thing, it is talking about, in fact, breathing. Shemeshiv nafsho unishmato behargio mitorach hamelacha umi shekatuv bo lo iyaf velo yiga v'chol po'alo b'mamar hichtiv menucha ba'atzmo Lesaver ha'ozan ma shehi yechola lishma. Wow. Okay, let's see how they translate this, because I'm not sure how I would translate this. Every form of nefesh is derived from the noun nefesh, soul. The idea is that one calms his soul and takes breath when one reposes after the toil of labor. And he of whom it is written, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, fainteth not, nor is he weary, and whose every action is accomplished by his mere command, had the term repose written, ascribed to himself, in order to make comprehensible to the human ear what it can understand. So, I mean, Rashi's saying don't take this too literally.
Right.
Um, yeah, the on so
Well,
it's yeah.
no, it just reminded me like on Shabbat you get a second soul too. So and here it says that this is you're taking a breath. So on
Yeah.
Shabbat you have two souls. You can get an even deeper breath.
So I would actually say that part of the reason why it says Vayinafash with Nefesh is when we talk about the Nefesh, we're in fact talking about the materiality of your soul. That is the lowest
Right.
aspect of your soul. And like when we talked about like dear in Bati Lagani, right? The Ratzakash Baruch Hu Dira Betachtonim, right? Ultimately, on that seventh day, right, the coming of the Mashiach, that's when you have Uvati Lagani Laganuni, to that place where I was at the very beginning, right? It is a completion of that journey all the way into materiality.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know if I mean, again, it's very hard for me to speak about this stuff authoritatively, but when we talk about, and sometimes like even in rabbinic writings, they're not being bediyuk. They're not using the words as technically as we may want. When they talk about nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, yechida, right?
So oral Torah, yeah.
And there is the fact that oral Torah. So this is another thing. So Yosef and I were talking, right? When you talk about, for example, the Kabbalah of the Ramak, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, right? So we actually don't paskin. We paskin like the Arizal and not right like the Ramak. So what does that mean? That there is a difference in how things, the spiritual character of things in their interpretation, right? When there is a psak din, when ultimately through the course of human events, um, there becomes a spiritual reality that we would call a psak din, a things are bound on earth and in heaven through these piskei din, right? So our actions have real spiritual effect. And I have to be careful here because ultimately the spiritual effects of what we are capable of doing do not go all the way up into Atzilut. There's a break between Atzilut and Bria. But spiritually, from Asiyah, we can in fact affect even the worlds of Bria, if that make any sense whatsoever.
I have a note here. It says Asiyah is the first one, Yetzirah is the second one, Bria is the third one, and Atzilut is the
Yeah,
highest one.
Atzilut. Yeah, so there, Atzilut is the worlds of emanation.
Mm-hmm.
Then there is a break,
Mm-hmm.
and
All
after the
can be
break
different.
is
Yeah.
Bria, which is create the worlds of creation. Then Yetzirah, the worlds of emanation, and then there's Asiyah, the worlds of action. And the fact is that if you are capable of being mevatel your yetzer hara, you are able to manifest all of these worlds at once in this world so that even Atzilut is Ma'atzil, is able to emanate
Mm.
in Asiya, right? But
Perfect harmony.
yeah, but it, and so that's when we sin, in fact, we are creating a sort of break in these spiritual worlds, right? And that is what causes the lack of godliness and the spiritual pollution of our sins in the world.
Mhm.
Okay?
Yeah.
Um, and we were talking about klipa and sitra achra, right? So we have the tzad, the kedusha, we have the everything we talked about in regards to holiness, and then zelo matzeh. Then there's also unholiness, and so the sitra achra, there are the three impure husks, and then there's the shining husk. And he's going to explain further of that. But there is an aspect of everyone's soul which comes from klipa and sitra achra, comes from the unholy side, the other side. Okay.
Mhm.
Um,
Let me know when you want me to.
uh, it's all you.
Okay. והיא מתלבשת, and I might use the English on the left.
Sounds good.
Yeah. והיא המתלבשת בדם האדם להחיות הגוף. It is this nefesh, the one from the klipa,
Mhm.
that is clothed in the blood of a human being, giving life to the body.
Mhm.
וכדכתיב,
Mhm.
כי נפש הבשר בדם היא.
Mhm.
As in this in Leviticus, for the nefesh of the, as it is written, for the nefesh of the flesh is in the blood.
Mhm.
Um,
So there is an aspect, right? So everything, in order to exist, has to have a spiritual makor, a spiritual fount, which gives it its capacity to exist.
mm-hmm.
And so even the those things are basest self, right? Are the basar, the flesh, the carnal nature has a spiritual aspect, has this nefesh, which uh, even though it comes from the klipa and sitra achra, it it is what allows that that nature to have an existence at all.
Right, and this is why we don't, or one of the reasons why we don't kosher meat as no it's purged of the blood.
That, yes, so there is that concept of the blood itself, right? Has, yeah, um, yeah,
Yeah, there's a respect for life, which is we do not want to. Yeah.
and actually, I mean, ultimately, Eastern Orthodox Christians won't. They still do not consume blood based on Genesis 9. Now, the rabbinic interpretation of that is that it only applies to Ever Minachai. It doesn't, like, once you slaughter an animal, a Gentile is permitted blood, but the Eastern Orthodox won't even have like black pudding and things that are made out of blood in general food. That's like a kind of kosher law that they keep.
Okay. הוא ממנה, I'm gonna continue. הוא
Mm-hmm.
ממנה באות כל המידות רעות,
Mm-hmm.
מארבע יסודות רעים שבה.
Mm-hmm.
So from this nefesh stems all the evil characteristics
Mm-hmm.
deriving from the four evil elements within it.
Right. And this goes back to the Aristotelian concepts of the four elements: fire, air, water, and earth, right? These types of things. Yeah. So what basically he's saying is that um, also regarding evil and things that are not from holiness, still they have these types of spiritual components which um, which exist within them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. דיינו, כעס וגאווה מיסוד האש שנקבע מלמעלה, namely anger, the first one, anger and pride, they emanate from the element of fire, which rises upward.
Right. So there's this concept in Aristotelian elements, right, that fire is that which makes you makes things rise, right? And a person through either anger, which, you know, he in his rage he becomes heated up, or in his pride he gets puffed up, right? So that's from this Aristotelian concept of the element of fire.
Okay. ותאוות התענוגים מיסוד המים, כי המים מצמיחים כל מיני תענוג. The appetite for pleasure is the second one, emanates from the element of water. For water promotes the growth of all kinds of pleasurable things.
Right. So, I mean, this is just a general framework of Aristotelian concepts, which he's using to explain also spiritual concepts.
Right. And this is again going over the sitra achera, the klipa.
Right.
ועוללות, the third one, ועוללות וליצנות והתפארות ודברים בטלים מיסוד הרוח. The third one, frivolity and scoffing, boasting and idle talk, emanate from the element of air. Like air, they lack substance. Reminds me of is that a midrash or a story of the rabbi, like talking about idle talk, like air, that it was. It's probably with Tzemach Tzedek is the one that really cares about Lashon Hara. Maybe it's him.
Chafetz Chaim, you're thinking.
Chafetz Chaim. Okay. I'll get there one. And then somebody comes to him and asks him, how am I going to repent for this?
Right.
And then the rabbi takes a pillow full of notzot, full of, how do you say notzot?
Feathers?
Feathers, yeah, feathers. Full of feathers, and he opens the pillow and he throws it out, and it all goes in the air.
Yeah.
And then he tells the guy, go pick up all the feathers. And the guy tells why? He says, well, like Lashon Hara, like idle talk, it goes everywhere.
It emanates.
And it affects multiple people, so you need to make sure that you cover all your ground.
Yep. Yeah. Okay.
והצלות והעצבות מיסוד העפר, אפר. And sloth and melancholy emanate from the element of earth.
Yeah. So you see in biblical Hebrew and rabbinic Hebrew, efer becomes afar at the end of a sentence, and that's why it changes from efer to afar. That's just so you know.
Okay, yeah, it still confuses me.
Yeah. Modern Hebrew is kind of different from biblical Hebrew. So.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think even in modern Hebrew, I'm confused about it in both modern and biblical Hebrew. וגם מידות טובות שבטבע כל ישראל בתולדתם, כמו רחמנות וגמילות חסדים באות ממנה. From this soul stems also the good traits inherent in every Jew's character, such as compassion and benevolence.
Go ahead and read the little note here.
Yeah, okay, that was my question. But since this is a nefesh of klipa and evil, how do good characteristics come from it? This matter is now addressed.
Okay, and this is one of the most controversial. This may be, in fact, the most controversial teaching in all of Chabad. So he's going to talk about the nefesh habahamit of Jews as opposed to the nefesh bahamit of Gentiles. And if you are actually paying attention, you should be paying attention to the fact that what he's saying is that the nefesh, that every human being has two forms of nefesh, nefesh habahamit and nefesh ha'elokit. And so he's not saying that the nefesh elokit chas v'shalom of Gentiles comes from klipa, because the nefesh elokit does not come from klipa at all. He's saying that rubam kekulam, when we are talking in generalities, the Jewish nefesh habahamit, the evil inclination within Jews, comes from the klipat noga, which is the shining husk that is still a husk and mostly evil, but has good parts in it that shine through, but it's still mostly just klipa, mostly raw. Whereas rubam kekulam, when we are talking about Gentiles, the nefesh habahamit comes from gimel klipot temeot, the three evil husks, not the shining husk, which do not have good in them. And so, just to be perfectly clear, what he's talking about is the evil inclination of each person. Okay, got it.
Let's go for it. כי בישראל נפש זו דקליפה היא מקליפת נוגה, שיש בה גם כן טוב, והיא מסוד עץ הדעת טוב ורע. For just like you explained, for in this case, in the soul of Israel, of the Jew, the soul is of the klipa, who is derived from the klipa called noga, which also contains good. And the good within this nefesh gives rise to these positive natural traits, the benevolence and compassion. And it's also the esoteric knowledge which is the klipa is from the esoteric tree of knowledge, which is comprised of good and evil. So it's the knowledge that we derive from, I guess, the sinners of the tree.
So when he says vehi misod etz hadat tovara, he's saying that we are talking about this esoteric concept that is known as the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which this is an etz, it is a tree, it is something which is composed of both good and evil. And that's the klipat noga, that is the shining husk, where you have this combination of the two, which doesn't exist either in the tzad de kedusha or in the klipot temeot, which are there there is not this mixture, this eruv between good and evil.
Okay. מה שאין כן, נפשות אומות העולם, אין משאר קליפות טמאות, שאין בהם טוב כלל.
So he's talking about the evil inclination of Gentiles, and he says that they come from the klipot temeot, which are completely evil. They don't have a good aspect to them, like the klipat noga, which, while it's mostly evil, almost completely evil, has certain aspects of kedusha which shine through to it.
כמו שכתוב, I'll read that and then I have a question. כמו שכתוב בעץ חיים, שער מ"ת פרק ג', בכל טיבו דאבדין האומות לגרמהו אבדין. As it is written in Etz Chaim, Portal 49, chapter 3, that all the good that the nation do is done out of selfish motives.
Right. So ultimately, so since their nefesh emanates from klipot, which contain no good, they're not meitiv, it follows that the good that is done through them is in fact for the intention of themselves, not beneficial to others.
So this is this referring to what will come out of the nefesh habahamit?
This is all we're talking about, nefesh habahamit, and I mean,
because I mean this will clash with like the idea of like Chasidu Umot Olam, like if you have somebody that.
Okay, yes and no, because Chasidei Umot, we're talking in generalities, and so we're not in fact talking about every single person. We're talking generally, like you look through world history, right? What you see in general, not what any particular person. So there are the Chasidei Umot HaOlam, where that particular person's soul comes from may be very different from what we speak about in generalities.
Okay. Okay, so the Gemara. Oh, sorry. I'll start with the Hebrew. וכדאיתא בגמרא על פסוק, וחסד לאומים חטאת, שכל צדקה וחסד שמות העולם עושים, אינן אלא להתייהר וכו'. So the Gemara comments on the verse. The kindness of the nation is sin, that all the charity and kindness done by the nations of the world is only for their self-glorification.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I also find this all... I need more explanation.
So... so like it says here, it should be noted that among the nations of the world, there are also to be found those whose souls are derived from Klipat Noga, and he gives things called the pious ones of the nations of the world. These righteous individuals are benevolent, not out of selfish motives, but out of a genuine concern for their fellow. So like I was saying, I mean, this is in fact talking in generalities. And it's talking in generalities. I mean, you look through world history, and I have to say, historically, what we see here, I mean, it's kind of been borne out that you see there is this...
especially from the perspective of the Jew.
Well, not even just that. I mean, so there within Judaism, there's this concept of I mean, Isaiah 53, Mesirut Nefesh, right? We believe that the that Israel has in fact suffered for the goodness of the entire world through history, whereas Rome and Persia and all those other nations, Egypt, right? They they were mostly benevolent to themselves, not in the Mesirut Nefesh that we would say historically. You, when you look at Israel through history, there is a different character to the Jewish um, nation than the nations that have existed. Now, that is not to say that in the future it's not possible, and there are people who say, for example, that the United States in its benevolence has been unlike all world empires before it, and there's definitely a case to be made for that. But let's, I mean, when we're looking through world history, frankly, I don't. It's uncomfortable things to say, but I don't find it historically invalid to say that throughout history, Israel has existed in a manner of beneficence that other nations have not. I mean, ultimately, if you're going to, here, I'll play this video, which I think is important. If I can find it, where are my clips?
We live in an
Okay.
age of miracles where the notion that the Jews are chosen, meaning at the center of God's plan in some mysterious way, I think seems pretty obvious. But it is something that many Jews shy away from.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to be able to defend it, to defend that concept. Without, of course, without arrogance, with gratitude and humility and responsibility and a feeling of responsibility and awe. But we will not be able to make the case for Judaism if we can't defend chosenness.
So I am going to put the link to this in the chat in case anybody wants to watch the full video. But ultimately, if you are going to defend Judaism, and I do, if you believe in Judaism, and I do, then there is a concept of Ataba Hartanu, that we are in fact a chosen nation. There is a difference between the Jew and the Gentile. If the Torah actually taught that Gentiles were all the children of Satan, right, and they're all going to hell, I would have to either believe that Judaism is wrong or believe that in fact they are the children of Satan and all going to hell and stuff, right? So I don't take, I am not trying to take those things which Judaism teaches and sugarcoat them. I believe Judaism teaches certain things, which includes a qualitative difference between the soul of a Jew and the soul of a Gentile, and the role of Israel in the world and the role of other nations in the world. And because I think Judaism does, in fact, reflect the truth in the world, is why I believe in Judaism. So I'm not sugarcoating Judaism. Like, unfortunately, some people would think that me trying to be very careful in explaining these things, which I have tried to be extremely careful in explaining these things, is an attempt to appease people like this guy who obviously, you know, is looking for reasons to hate Jews. And if the fact that Judaism teaches that, yes, there is a difference, there is a chosen nature to Israel and the Jewish soul, is going to cause you to hate me, then go ahead and hate me. That's not why I'm being careful here. Why I'm being careful here is I think people actually misunderstand it. It is an improper and wrong understanding of Judaism to think that, for example, like all Gentiles are going to hell and they come from the Satan and stuff like that. I think that's just plain wrong. At the same time, I do think that Israel has a special role in the world, and that there is something special about Israel and being a Jew. Ultimately, I believe that we are Atemti Huli Mamlechet Kohanim, that we are in fact a nation of priests. Or it says, Beni Bechori Israel, my firstborn son is Israel. And so I'm not going to sugarcoat that.
Makes sense. Yeah, I appreciate you going through it. Yeah. Sounds good.
Okay.
Okay. We're in chapter 2.
We are in chapter 2.
ונפש השנית בישראל היא חלק אלוהה ממעל ממש. The second, uniquely Jewish soul is truly a part of God above.
Right. So this is actually one of the quotes of the Alter Rebbe, which is best known. Man the napach, and he'll say, Man the napach mitoche napach, right? So there is this concept that the godly soul is in fact from God himself, and especially the godly soul within Israel is, and that's where this concept of Yechida comes from, is an emanation of godliness that is more direct than that is chelak elokah mimal, that is actually godliness revealed in the world.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think going back to thinking about it, like the Kohanim is helpful because it's like,
yeah,
and it's also an element of being born with it. Like you have no control over it in some sense.
Yeah.
כמו שכתוב, ויפח באפיו נשמת חיים. As it is written concerning Adam, whose soul was a comprehensive one, and neshama klalit, in that it contained all the particular souls of subsequent generations, and he blew into his nostrils a soul of life. So the neshama klalit, I guess that I just don't know. I didn't know about that specifically, but it.
Right. So there is this neshama klalit that was in Adam Harishon, right? That binds all of humanity together. And then there is, so when we talk about Yechidah, like, so there is a soul called Knesset Israel, right? The collection of Israel, which uniquely is represented in Israel. So when we talk about the 5 levels of soul, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, right? Which every human being has. And then there is a nefesh kolel, right? That is a collective soul in Israel, which is called the Yechidah, which is specific to Israel.
Yeah, it reminds me, I don't know if I could express it right, but like somebody was talking about having a principle. So let's say I'm trying to get you to build something,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm giving you kind of like a general requirement or general principle, and then you get to derive, and then you think about that principle as to the thing that you're trying to create, and you also derived other requirements from it.
Mm-hmm.
To continue build it and to like add the detail and everything like that. The laws that you derived or the sub requirements that you derived are not entirely distinct from the principle or from the requirement that I gave you.
They are details. Yeah, they are details of the original. Right. So when I tell you to build a house, right? So I didn't say build a kitchen, build a bathroom, build a bedroom. I said build a house. But that includes all of the pratim, all of the details of it.
Right.
Yeah.
ואתה נפחת בי. And as we say in prayer concerning the soul of every individual Jew, you blew it into me.
Right. In the morning prayers, we say, Ata nafachta bi, right?
וכמו שכתוב בזוהר, מן דנפח מתוכיה נפח.
So this is in Aramaic, and actually it's not a quote from the Zohar itself, it's a paraphrase. Man the napach mitoche napach. The one who blows from mitoche, from within him. Aramaic slightly different from Hebrew. That's why you're having difficulty with it.
That is true. מתוכיותו ומפנימיותו. So from his inside, inwards and innermost being. So let's say double. Yeah. שתוכיות ופנימיות החיות שבאדם מוציא בנפיחותו בכוח. For it is of his inward and innermost vitality that a man emits through blowing with force.
So when you breathe out, right, you go, right, you're blowing out, it's coming from within you, right? And so what does it mean that we say God blew out, right? Obviously, God doesn't have a body. It comes from, we are explaining that in a similar manner, it came from within God himself.
Yeah. So, כך, על דרך משל, נשמות ישראל עלו במחשבה. So to allegorically speaking, have Jewish souls risen in the divine thought. כדכתיב, בני בכורי ישראל. And בנים אתם לאדוני אלוהיכם. As it is written regarding the Jewish nation, Israel is my firstborn son. And concerning Jews as individuals, you are children unto God your Lord. פירוש, כמו שהבן נמשך ממוח האב, that is to say, the significance of the Jews being called God's child is that just as a child is derived from his father's brain, his inner and essential being.
So, okay, to get a little bit too physical, but like ultimately the very, very beginning source of that seed that gets implanted to become a child is from like the mental stimulation of the man, right? Ultimately, it goes from moach into his body to emanate out the seed, which then gestates and becomes the child. In a similar manner, Israel, Allah b'machshava, comes from God's mochen, whatever that means.
Right. כך כביכול נשמת כל איש ישראל נמשכה ממחשבתו וחוכמתו יתברך. So too, to use an anthropomorphism, is the soul of every Jew derived from God's thought and wisdom. Right. דהיו חכמים ולא
No, so this again is in Aramaic. The ihu hakim v'la b'chachma yadia, that he is wise but not known through wisdom.
By the way, I can tell that it's Aramaic, so I can just tell you that I can just leave it for you. וכמו שכתב הרמב"ם, שהוא המדע והוא היודע כל.
Well, you skipped a thing. Elahu v'chokhmato echad. Right?
אלוהו וחוכמתו אחד.
So when we talk about God, his wisdom is in fact completely united with him, because God has no parts.
And כמו שכתב הרמב"ם, שהוא המדע והוא היודע והכל. So like where the Rambam Maimonides writes, he is knowledge and simultaneously the knower. Knows and comprehends through the knowledge. And he is that which is known. God is also the subject of knowledge and comprehension, as Maimonides concludes.
Yeah. So might as well read the note here. This means that God's wisdom and comprehension are totally different from man's. In human comprehension, there are three separate and distinct components. A, the person's soul, the knower and possessor of knowledge. B, the power of intellect and comprehension, the knowledge by which the person knows. C, the subject of the knowledge, the known, such as a law in the Mishnah or a discussion in the Gemara, which is apprehended and known. Concerning God's wisdom, however, Maimonides states, he is the knowledge, the knower, and the known. God is the means of comprehension, the knowledge, and at the same time is he who understands the knower, and is also that which is understood, the known, because God unifies everything within himself.
Right. ודבר זה אין ביכולת האדם להבינו על בוריו כה. And this is not within the power of any man to comprehend clearly, is what Maimonides adds.
Yep.
כדכתיב, החקר, אלוה תמצא.
Yeah. So, okay, this is a funny thing that most people don't know. Even so, you know what a patach gezula is?
I don't remember any
so
of that, unfortunately.
So if, for example, the word shliach, right? It's written shin lamed yud het, and there's a patach under the het, but you don't say shlicha, you say shliach. That's called a patach gezula.
A gezula, okay.
Right? Because it
silent patach.
It gets stolen by the letter behind it, right? So leach, for example, shliach is one of Mashiach, right? Now, what a lot of people don't know is that the same rule actually applies to any gronit, including ayin and hey. So with ayin, since it's silent, you never notice it. But for example, the word porea, right? It's actually, if you're going to say the ayin, it's pore'ah, not pore'ah, right? And similarly, it's not Eloha, it's Eloah.
Eloah.
Yeah, because it's a patach gezula.
Mm-hmm.
But very few people know this. Now you know this, and it will do you no good except next time you're reading the word Eloah, you will know it's Eloah and not Eloha.
Yeah. Cool. וכתיב כי לא מחשבותיי מחשבותיכם כבודו. As it is written, can you find and understand God by searching?
Mm-hmm.
And it is also written, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, says God.
Mm-hmm.
And so, consequently, your human thoughts cannot possibly comprehend my thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
So again, this discrepancy, or this is the difference between the thoughts and the comprehension of God and man.
Yeah. And we're going to do another one of these Kabbalistic notes, which are very difficult to understand. So I'll take over part for now. V'hodu lo chachmei haKabbalah kamo shekatuv bepardes meharamak. So in the so Maimonides is what is considered nigla, the exoteric Torah, and this is the esoteric Torah, right? So chachmei Kabbalah, which includes the Ramak, similarly explain things. V'gam lefi Kabbalat ha'ari zichrono lebracha yetziva milta. So similarly also by the Arizal. Besod hitlabshut or Ein Sof Baruch Hu al yedei tzimtzumim rabim bechelim de chochma bina dat de atzilut ach lo lamala meha atzilut וכמו שכתוב במקום אחר, שאין סוף ברוך הוא מרומם ומתנשא רוממות אין קץ, למעלה ממהות ובחינת חוכמה בינה ודעת. So we were, the way that Maimonides explains it, that God is the knower and the knowledge, right? So when you're talking about seder hishtalshalut, you have Chokhmah Bina Da'at as it manifests throughout the various worlds.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, when we talk about Atzilut, in Atzilut, all of these things are in fact, well, above Atzilut, all of these things are in fact all one and cannot be defined, and would be the way that Maimonides is explaining.
Right, and they're the darkness that that Moses was confronted with. Like, it's not something that like, I mean, if trying to,
right, it's beyond all understanding, right? Yeah. וכמו שכתוב במקום אחר שאין סוף ברוך הוא מרומם ומתנשא רוממות אין קץ, למעלה ממהות ובחינת חוכמה בינה דעת, עד שמהות ובחינת חוכמה בינה דעת נחשבת כעשייה גופנית אצלו יתברך, כמו שכתוב כולם בחוכמה עשיתה. So ultimately, when we talk about God in his infinite essence, even Chabad of Atzilut is like the Asiyah in relation to God himself.
I don't think I got that.
Good, because if you didn't, that's about as much as I'm able to explain.
Cool. Okay, that's a very good answer.
Yeah, the notes are even like, yeah, the notes are very difficult to comprehend, but ultimately what he's saying is that there is no contradiction between the fact that the Kabbalists are able to talk about godliness at a level above Asiyah, above the physical matter, because they're talking in spiritual things, which would appear to create some sort of hevdel between God as the knower and the subject that is known. But really, in essence, kulam b'chokhmah asita, all of this in relation to God, kala chashev. It all is the same and without distinction.
Now continuing on.
Yeah.
ואף שיש רבבות מיני חלוקי מדרגות בנשמות, גבוה מעל גבוה לאין קץ. True, there are myriads of different gradations of souls in neshamot, which is, so you have nefesh and neshama, or is he talking about the...
So here he's really talking about neshamot. He's talking about the nefesh elokit, right? That there are distinctions, I mean, as he's going to say, between the various souls. So again, part of what he is being careful to explain is we are in fact talking in generalities here. And when we talk more specifically, right, this is a general thing you have to understand about Chassidut, about these spiritual matters,
right,
that we, in order to talk about things, we talk in mashalot and using heuristics and using symbols and generalities, because that's the only way we can talk about them. And if you were to take them too literally, if you were to try to, in fact, understand them in a fundamentalist aspect, they would in fact come all crashing down, because that's not how we are able to understand ruchniut.
Right. So would it be your recommendation to, as you read this, if you're Jewish, for example, as you read this, always have a work of halacha next to you, so that you ground some of these things? But like really, like this is, as like you mentioned, this is very high stuff. That is, does PBK call this spiritual bypassing? Right? It's like you would. Is this a term? I don't know what he's. I'm not sure that I'm getting.
That's interesting. So ultimately, the reason we talk about things in the spiritual realm in this level, and he's going to in fact talk about it, and it's funny, but like this is the part that Rav Soloveitchik quotes at length in Halachic Man, which is ultimately we talk about these things and these understandings in order for it to align our thinking with God's ratzon, so that it will in fact make us enact God's will in the world, right? So ultimately, the Rav is correct. It's like you don't even need all of these kavanot, right? You don't need to know that, oh, so the shorish neshama of this person comes from this, and that's why today, like all of the history of the world from the creation until today, like, does it really matter that 5,783 years ago God created Adam, and through Adam, like all of these things happened, to the fact that today I need to be a good person, a kind person, a person, right?
Yeah. So
theoretically, we can in fact be the halachic man and just care about this. At the same time, that spiritual upheaval and dealing with the contradictions in our soul and purifying it and bringing it into our feelings, so that we are in fact animated, like we feel that love for creation and God's creation and our place in creation. that in fact animates us to do things, which is the ultimate goal.
Yeah. So it reminds me. You can tell me if this is the same thing, but it reminds me of I was watching this series Chabad has, like Chabad U,
Mm-hmm.
where they have courses, which is amazing, where you can go through stuff.
Yeah.
So one of them, he was talking about laws. So the written Torah, let's say written Torah, and then rabbinical laws, or written or oral Torah, so halacha, and then rabbinical laws, let's say, and then customs, so Masorah, I guess.
Minhag, yeah.
And he was saying how Masoret is sometimes even perceived as an even bigger thing, let's call it. And now the analogy that I want to bring in that he talks about too is like, if you have a partner, right? If like say if I know my wife, I know her well, then I can do things for her that she didn't tell me to do. Like she doesn't tell me to bring flowers to her, but if I know she likes flowers, then I bring the flowers. So I'm trying to extend this analogy of saying like, I don't need to know what the intricacies of why she likes flowers, and maybe it could be helpful because I could place the flowers in a certain way that reminds her of her childhood, maybe I don't know, something like that. But I mean, I just need to bring the flowers at the end of the day. Like there are certain things.
Yes, I would say, I mean, the analogy there is slightly different because your wife doesn't need to tell you to bring flowers for, and when we talk about Masorah and Minhag and things like that, there is a connection there, which obviously your wife is happier if you bring her flowers and she didn't tell you. Right? If she tells you bring me flowers and you bring her flowers, there's a certain type of joy she has in the fact that you listen to her. But if you bring it from yourself, there's a different thing.
Right.
What we're talking here is more along the lines of, if you bring your wife flowers because you know she likes it, right? And you're trying to appease her and make her happy, there is one way you do it. Whereas if your motivation is that you are in fact happy when your wife is happy, right? Making her happy makes you happy, right? That animates you so that it's not drudgery for you to go to the flower store. It's not, oh, this is something I have to do. It's something you have a cheshek for,
right,
that is animating you to go and do it. And I think that's more of the discussion here, is why are we talking about all of these, why are we talking about all these spiritual realities, right? When ultimately it's not a question. Yes, you're going to go buy flowers, right? The Rav would say, you're going to go buy flowers, and I don't care if you enjoy buying flowers or not. Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. You have to go buy flowers, and you're going to go buy flowers, and that's all that matters. And there's a certain kibul all in that, which is understandable and understood. Whereas Hasidus, like
joy, yeah,
it's about animating your desire to want to go, and telling you, oh, your wife will be so happy because she likes flowers for this reason, right? You don't need to understand that in order for you to go buy the flowers. but in fact, this, I would say this is the fundamental disagreement that between Hasidic Judaism and Lithuanian Mitnagdish, right? The Mitnagdim, they're like, it doesn't matter. You should be Makabal all. And the Hasidim are like, no, no, no. You should be happy. It's not Kibul all. And they're both correct in their own way.
Right.
But ultimately, I have to say, I think the Hasidim are more right.
Yeah, interesting. Cool. So, כמו גודל מעלת נשמות האבות ומשה רבנו עליהם השלום, על נשמות דורותינו, אלא דעקבי משיכה.
Ikvei Meshicha, right?
אלא דעקבי משיכה.
Yeah.
So, for example, the souls of the patriarchs, this is talking about the gradations and ranks of neshamot. The souls of the patriarchs and of Moses, our teacher, are by far superior to the souls of our own generations, which belong to the period preceding the coming. The heels, the footsteps of the Mashiach. So, which one belong? The patriarchs or we?
We are in Ikva the Mashiach, right? So,
right.
the heels of the Mashiach, right? Our souls come from the lowest status in Shiur Koma, whereas the souls of the patriarchs come from much higher places. But yeah, ultimately, all of them come from Chelek Olaka Mimal. And since they come from Chelek Olaka Mimal, right, because they are ultimately from God, there is no distinction between them. So he's explaining, in one sense, there is no distinction between all of these souls. In another sense, there's a huge distinction between all of these souls. And both of these are true at the same time.
Right. שהם בחינת הגביעים ממש לגבי המוח והראש. For the latter souls.
Akevayim.
Yeah. For the latter souls are like the very souls of the feet in comparison with the brain and the head. So they're talking about the souls of our generation.
Yep.
וכן, בכל דור ודור יש ראשי אלפי ישראל שנשמותיהם הם בחינת ראש ומוח לגבי נשמות ההמון ועמי הארץ. So I mean, this repeats also what we discussed before.
Yeah.
Which is this thing about hierarchy that is echoed in other conversations as well. So this is just a reflection here. Other conversations that I'm thinking about, like outside of Peugeot talking about this, loves to talk about hierarchy, and obviously in cognition, very important. So yeah.
Yep.
I like that concept. Makes sense. Similarly, I'm here. Similarly, within each generation, we find the same disparity among neshamot. There are those who are the heads, leaders of the multitudes of Israel, so designated because their souls are in the category of head and brain in comparison with those of the masses and the ignorant. וכן נפשות לגבי נפשות, כי כל נפש כלולה מנפש רוח ונשמה. Likewise, there are similar distinctions between nefashot and nefashot, the soul levels of nefesh. For every soul consists of nefesh, ruach, and neshama.
Right. So this is one of the concepts that people have the most trouble with, which is, in Judaism, our concept of soul is fragmented into many pieces and parts, right? So you have half a soul and your wife has another half of your soul, And then when you have children, part of your soul is mitlabesh within your children, right? And so the soul of Moshe Rabbeinu, right? One of the reasons we call him Moshe Rabbeinu is because in essence he is also a neshama kolel, right? And so you have a bit of Moshe Rabbeinu's soul within your soul, right? So when we talk about souls, we're not talking about one distinct thing that exists as a unit. We're talking about spiritual extensions which manifest as powers and capabilities within your being.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So this is a cup, right? And it's also a cylinder, right? So if we were to say that the Platonic ideal of cup, right, is like a soul, and the Platonic ideal of cylinder is a soul, this is in fact an instantiation of both cup and cylinder, right?
Right.
Hopefully that helps understand this analogy of there is, for example, the soul of Moshe Rabbeinu, right, which has some form of instantiation within you.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, kind of like the Consciousness Congress.
yeah. That's, yeah.
Cool. That's my second PVK reference. אוקיי, מכל מקום, שורש כל הנפש, נפש, רוח ונשמה כולם, מראש כל המדרגות עד סוף כל דרגין, המלובש בגוף עמי הארץ וקל שבקלים.
נמשך ממוח
העליון, שהיא חוכמה אילהה
כביכול.
כביכול.
Yeah.
So let's do the English. Nevertheless, the root of every nefesh, ruach, and neshama, from the highest of all ranks to the lowest, the lowest being those souls embodied within the simple folk and the most religiously irreverent people, all are derived, as it were, from the supreme mind, which is chokhmah il'ah.
Right. So ultimately, there are differences in the various levels of soul between a person who is a great tzaddik and a person who's putz, like me. But ultimately, there is a tzad hashaveh beinehem. There is an aspect in which all of these derive from chokhmah ila'ah kavyachol, and that word is important, kavyachol. Like in all of this, we are trying to explain spiritual realities in terms of material world so that we can understand it.
Right. כמשל הבן הנמשך ממוח האב, שאפילו ציפורני רגליו נתהוו מטיפה זו ממש.
Right. So just as you have a child, that every single aspect of it, even its toenails, ultimately derive from that original zygote, that original egg that came together, right? And so all of the cells have turned into all kinds of different, there are heart muscles and skin muscle, heart cells and skin cells, and right, they all ultimately originate from the same thing. In a similar manner, all of these souls, even though they are manifested in very different myriads of ways, they still come from Chokhmah Ilah.
Yeah. על ידי שהייתה 9 חודשים בבטן האם, וירדה ממדרגה למדרגה, להשתנות ולהתהוות ממנה ציפורניים. By being in the mother's womb for 9 months, descending degree by degree, changing continually until even the nails are formed from it. Just reading the note, because though the child born is all derived from the same source, the drop of semen which comes from the father's brain, yet they develop into entities as radically diverse as the brain and the nails. Okay, that's interesting. ועם כל זה, עודנה קשורה ומיוחדת בייחוד נפלא ועצום במהותה ועצמותה הראשון שהייתה טיפת מוח האב.
Right.
Furthermore, I'll just read this also for me. Furthermore, although the drop has been so altered as to become the substance of the child's nail, yet it is still bound and united in a wondrous and mighty unity with its original essence and being, namely, the drop of semen as it came from the father's brain.
Right. So, like, ultimately, everything originated from that, like, that thought within the father's brain, which caused a chain of events all the way until this child is born and has toenails, right? So it's, yes, there's a lot of things that happened, but ultimately it's all an extension of that first thought, right? You've heard people say, before you were a glimmer in your father's eyes, right? Yeah. So there was a time you were a glimmer in your father's eyes.
Yeah, but there's a connection. It's there's a connection from that to here. Yep. It reminds me of I was just starting to go through. I'm attempting to just started with like Mishnah Torah and Y.Y. Jacobson, going through it.
Okay.
And he goes through the introduction, and Rambam goes through explaining or just laying out the chain from Moses, 40 generations, I think, from Moses to
Rabbi.
Yeah. And yeah, that is very important to understand that there's like from that drop of knowledge, right, from Sinai, there is a chain and it is still connected to it. So that's important to know. Yeah, that it's still connected to it. It's from it, derived from it. Yeah.
Yep.
וגם עכשיו בבן, יניקת הציפורניים, וחיותם נמשכת מהמוח שבראש. Even now in the son, the nails receive their nourishment and life from the brain that is in his head. Right.
So, I mean, all of, like, even though, for example, your extremities seem very removed from your what you would consider yourself, all of you is all from the same thing.
Yeah. And this is for you.
Oh, what?
No.
No. This isn't a note yet. No. The notes are far more Kabbalistic than this.
No, I thought it was going.
I can take over, though. I can take over. Because it's in Aramaic. Okay, like exists. Ita is yesh in Aramaic. Loven shemimeno gidim va'atzamot v'tzipornaim. Right. So, from the white are formed the veins, the bones, and the nails of the child. And I mean, yeah, ultimately, what I don't like is some people take this too literally. Uchamosh katuva be'etz hayim shar hashmal besod libushim shel adam harishon began eden shahayu tzipornaim mebichinat moach tavuna. And so in Etz Chaim, which is by Reb Chaim Vital, there it's talking about the Adam Harishon in Gan Eden, so Adam in in the Garden of Eden, was his nails comes from this concept of moach tevuna, cognitive faculties of the brain. V'kacha mamash kvyachol בשורש כל הנפש, רוח ונשמה של כללות ישראל למעלה. And yeah, he's getting into really Kabbalistic things that the souls essentially come from the machshava of Hashem in the highest of the worlds. Yeah, not going to do all of those.
And so reminds me also of there's the understanding that every Jewish soul that's ever lived and ever will have lived was present at Sinai. So is there any sense of where was it present? I'm not trying to make it material, but I'm just trying to think about, like, is it thinking about this in terms of Moses?
So there is this concept of, so really Sinai was a coming together of spirituality. So in a very real sense, all of us were Gerim, were so Chazi's here. Even after death, the nails lives on as if hinting on the everlasting life to come, called Keruvim, called Merkava as well. Getting deep. Yes, getting a little bit too deep, maybe. But so there is this concept that when at Mount Sinai, like, there was a change in creation which fundamentally changed the nature of creation, right? So even all Torah as it existed after Sinai is fundamentally different than Torah as it existed before Sinai. And Israel as it existed after Sinai is fundamentally different than it existed before Sinai. Right. And this is actually why, for example, we would say that the Brit Noah, right, the covenant of Noah, which came before Sinai, like Maimonides says, it is because of the Torah itself that it was mitchadesh in a way. It became a spiritual reality in the world through Torah.
Right.
And our souls, like the birth of Israel, was actually at Sinai. Which is ultimately why it's like whether each individual person who came out of Egypt was directly descended from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is not really the matter there, right? Like Moshe Rabbeinu's wife was not directly descended from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Yeah.
Yet, like Sinai was a much bigger deal than I think um, people recognize without the halachic implications of it. Like,
Yeah.
I never thought of it as what I believe it is now without learning Torah the way that I have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something that comes up for me as well. Like I was ignorant to the
Centrality of it.
right, or the qualitative, like I mean, the qualitative difference in the
Yeah.
revelation and things like that. So it's interesting.
Yep. Let's see. Where should we? Trying to think where's a good place to stop.
Mm-hmm.
Let's keep on going for a little bit. בירידתו ממדרגה למדרגה על ידי השתלשלות העולמות, אצילות, בריאה, יצירה, עשייה, מחוכמתו יתברך, כדכתיב כולם בחוכמה עשייה. Right? So there is this seder hishtalshalut. There is the chain of constriction which starts all the way in Atzilut, goes through Bria, Yetzirah, Asiyah, and all of it comes ultimately from the Chokhmah Ila'ah, like it says, Kulam b'Chokhmah Asiyah. Nithavu mimenu nefesh ruach neshama shel amei haaretz upechutei ha'erech. So even the least of people, the most simple of people, ultimately has its shoresh, has its nekudah all the way in God Himself.
Yeah.
ועם כל זה, עודנו קשורות ומיוחדות בייחוד נפלא ועצום, במהותן ועצמותן הראשון, שהיא המשכת חוכמה עילה, right? Yet, even though we perceive that there are all of these gradations, ultimately, in the spiritual reality, all of it is one because it comes ultimately from God. כי יניקת וחיות נפש רוח ונשמה של עמי הארץ הוא מנפש רוח ונשמה של הצדיקים והחכמים ראשי בני ישראל שבדורם. And this is one of the basic concepts of Hasidic philosophy, that ultimately the tzaddik, the leader of Bnei Israel in the world, is the spiritual font from which the entire world, but specifically Israel, receive all of their spiritual yenika, their spiritual capacity and power.
Yeah. So I have a question. It might be a tangential question. So we'll see.
Okay.
Maybe I'll wait to close. I don't know. But I'm curious if I'm even putting this together right. But I'm curious. It looks like in Rambam, does he talk? Is tzaddik the same as navi? As prophet? As Rambam looks at it?
So, I mean, this concept of tzaddik. So, Rambam, when he talks about nevuah, reaching a level of holiness, right?
Yeah.
He says that a person should be metar himself, should grow in his capacity and sanctification until he reaches the level of nevuah. I would say that's talking about a different aspect. That's itaruta delatata. That is an awakening of our soul from below. Whereas here, the Alter Rebbe is trying to explain Seder Hishtalshalut, how from God Himself we can have the Yerida Madriga, right?
Right, because we're continuing, the soul is in us, and we want to continue, and there's a responsibility there of
right. So it's coming all the way down, and one of the steps through which we in fact receive our spiritual chiyut, our spiritual capacities, is through the tzaddik. So, I mean, really, for the vast majority of us, and pretty much all of us, there is no possibility of me, for example, becoming a tzaddik. I'm just, that's just not, that's me. That's just not like gonna happen. Whereas there are tzaddikim who like were born with a specific spiritual power, which allows them as leaders to, in fact, so I don't know if you saw that video of Rav Moshe Feinstein that I put in the links.
I flipped through it.
Yeah, so it's a very rare video of Rav Moshe Feinstein, and so it's weird that Rav Moshe, right, like he was just a single person, but he had a spiritual capacity to completely change what is kosher or not kosher in the world, right? When he said that we can rely on the USDA certifying that milk comes from cows, right? So it was a big question, and some people still. So when you see Chalav Israel, for example, right? That means that there was actual supervision to make sure that it's cow's milk, that it doesn't come from a different animal.
Right.
And Rav Moshe Feinstein was the one who said that we can rely on the USDA certification that it's cow's milk, and we don't, like, that's kosher, right? Now, this was a huge change in how the laws of kashrut were understood. But because he made that change, right, all of kashrut in the world is very different now.
Well, because he is who he is.
Right. He had a capacity to affect that spiritual change.
Somebody else making that change or attempting to make that change would not have necessarily.
I mean, there's nobody alive today who has the type of authority that Rav Moshe did. There's nobody who was as authoritative and had that capacity. And in a very real sense, like, that's not something to aspire to. That's something to recognize. And I think more than anything, like, yeah, there is an aspiration to nevuah, like you talked about in Maimonides. There is not an aspiration, like, it's not something you aspire to be Rav Moshe, right? It's something that happens, or even the Rebbe or the Rav, right? It's something that happens that is from outside of you.
Yeah. That's a good distinction. I think it helps.
Okay. We are at time for today, and so we ended here. So we'll start at Uvaze Yuvan
Mhm.
next time. I am going to end the broadcast.